Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the virtual public meeting for the Tunnel to Ontario International Airport. My name is Madison Viola. I'm with the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority outreach team, and we're going to give it just a few minutes before we get started to allow everybody to join. We're still letting people in from the waiting room, so if you could just sit tight and we'll proceed shortly. Thank you. All right, it looks like we have quite a few people who have entered the meeting. Again, my name is Madison Viola. I'm with the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, supporting outreach efforts for the Tunnel to Ontario International Airport. This is the public meeting, and we're going to go ahead and get underway. To start, we have a few housekeeping items before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. The recording will be on our website later this week at go.sbcta.com/tunnel. Spanish interpretation is also available during this meeting. Elizabeth Orozco will serve as our interpreter. When I'm done going through these announcements, Elizabeth will repeat them in Spanish. As part of the meeting feature, your microphones are automatically muted and cameras are disabled. There will be an opportunity for questions following this presentation. We'll be using the raise hand feature, which we'll provide further instructions for on a later slide. Finally, as part of the scoping process, which started on July 5th, this meeting will feature a breakout room with a designated court reporter for you to provide comments to be included in the draft environmental impact report. Additional information will be provided shortly. Elizabeth, if you can go ahead and translate these steps for our viewers.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a esta reunión. La reunión del día de hoy está siendo grabada. La grabación estará en nuestro sitio web a finales de esta semana en go.sbcta.com/túnel. La interpretación contaremos con interpretación al español. Una vez que yo haya terminado de leer estos anuncios, continuaremos con otras instrucciones. Como parte de la función de la reunión, su micrófono se encuentra silenciado automáticamente y las cámaras están desactivadas. Habrá una oportunidad para que realice preguntas después de la presentación. Vamos a usar la función de levantar la mano, para la cual proporcionaremos instrucciones en una diapositiva posterior. Por último, como parte del proceso de alcance que comenzó el 5 de julio, esta reunión contará con una sala de trabajo en la cual tendremos una taquígrafa designada para que usted proporcione comentarios que se incluirán en el borrador del informe de impacto ambiental. En breve proporcionaremos instrucciones adicionales.
At this time, we will provide instructions for anyone interested in hearing today's instructions will enable interpretation and then begin our presentation. Elizabeth, will you please provide the interpretation instructions?
Ahora les daré las instrucciones para acceder al servicio de interpretación. Si usted se está conectando el día de hoy a través de una computadora, Después de que yo haya dado estas instrucciones, va a aparecer en la parte inferior de su pantalla un globo que dice Interpretation. Usted va a seleccionar ese globo y después va a seleccionar la opción de Spanish, es decir, español, en el menú que se muestre. Si usted se está conectando por teléfono móvil o por tableta, en lugar de ver este globo, usted va a ver 3 puntos que dicen More. Cuando vea estos 3 puntos, lo que usted va a hacer es seleccionarlo y va a seleccionar la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Posteriormente va a seleccionar Spanish, lo cual significa español, y luego ya estará dentro del canal. Es decir, en este momento voy a aceptar mi función de intérprete. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We've now launched the interpretation feature at the bottom of your screens if you care to use it. We will be using the raise hand feature within the Zoom platform to answer your questions after this evening's presentation. For those using the Zoom platform on your computer or laptop, the raise hand feature can be found on the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. Simply click on where it says raise hand. Our project staff will unmute your microphone and you will be able to ask your question or provide a comment. Once you've posed your question or comment, select lower hand from the menu. If you're using the Zoom app on your smartphone or tablet, you will find the raise hand feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Select the more icon with the 3 dots, and from the options given, you can select raise hand or lower hand. And if you are calling from a telephone tonight, please use *9 to raise your hand and press *6 to mute and unmute for a question or comment. We encourage your participation and questions in today's meeting, but the discussions that take place during the presentation will not be part of the official record. There are, however, several ways to officially provide comments to be part of the official record, and we'll cover those in a couple slides. And finally, this is an informational meeting to educate you about this project. We believe all positions, positive or negative, should have a voice in this process. However, we expect that this will be done in a respectful manner. SBCTA reserves the right to monitor, filter, and remove content or participants that our team deems inappropriate. During the scoping phase, we encourage you to submit a comment and have your voice heard. There are several ways to submit comments by August 5th, 2022. You can submit a comment at any time during this evening's presentation with our court reporter in the breakout room. If you would like to submit a formal comment with the court reporter, please rejoin the main entrance presentation when you are done, as staff can only allow 1 attendee at a time in the court reporter room. You can send a handwritten letter to the address on the screen. You can also email info@gosbcta.com using the subject line Tunnel to Ontario International Airport Project, or submit an online comment via the project website at gosbcta.com/tunnel. Please remember the deadline to submit comments to the Tunnel to Ontario International Airport Project is August 5th, 2022. As I shared, tonight's meeting will feature a breakout room for those wanting to leave a comment with the court reporter to be included in the draft environmental impact report. Once we launch this feature, you will see the words breakout room in your Zoom meeting toolbar and controls. If you are using an older version of Zoom, you may find this feature by clicking on the 3 dots to indicate more features. Once you click on breakout rooms, you will select join to officially join the court reporter breakout room, and then select join once more to confirm your choice. Again, if you are joining from a landline, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself, and a staff member will assist you in joining the breakout room. It is now my pleasure to introduce the SBCTA leads for this project: Tim Watkins, Chief of Legislative and Public Affairs, and Victor Lopez, Director of Transit and Rail Programs.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Madison, and great setup to this meeting. I'm sure I speak for Victor, everyone, that to see this many people join us tonight is just fantastic. It expands what we think is how great this process can be by doing it virtually and giving you a chance to participate from the comfort of wherever environment you're in. So thank you so much for joining us. I think I see somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 folks that have logged in. So that's just fantastic. So tonight's meeting is an early stage opportunity for the public to weigh in on areas they think may be beneficial for study during the environmental clearance process. It's the first of probably a couple touch points during the environmental process. We'll gather again once studies are kind of complete and the team has drafted an environmental document for you to review from a public perspective. So that will happen downstream from now. So it's a great opportunity. And so we value definitely the personal understanding of the publics and communities that they live within. And we want to honor that through the process. And this is one of the ways in which we get to do that. So thank you so much for joining us. We have lots of experts online later on, so they'll walk you through what this process is all about. But in the meantime, I'd like to turn it over to my friend Victor, our Director of Transit and Rail Programs.
Well, thank you, Tim. As mentioned, Victor Lopez, Director of Transit and Rail Programs. And, as Tim mentioned, we want to thank everyone here today for, taking the time and interest to be able to join us this evening, and look forward to, getting some input from everyone. We do want to reiterate that this project, is very important for a region and an organization as well. We think it's a good project that will improve the mobility, within our region. And again, looking forward to get some input from you as we embark on this project. So thank you.
Madison, I don't think there's much left to say. We do have experts coming online behind us. I'll let you walk through kind of that final introduction, and then we'll turn it over to the team.
Great, thanks Tim and Victor. Just to reiterate a couple things that Victor and Tim spoke to, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to learn more about the Tunnel to Ontario International Airport project, as well as the feasibility of transit between the Ontario International Airport and regional rail systems. For these documents, you can visit www.gosbcta.com/tunnel for the studies and other related documents. And as mentioned before, another purpose of this meeting is to provide comments and solicit feedback regarding potential environmental impacts to be included in the project's draft environmental impact report, or the draft EIR. To provide official comments, you can visit the court reporter at any time during this meeting in the court reporter breakout room. And with that, we're going to get the presentation underway. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Brandon, who will be sharing an overview of the project.
Thanks, Madison. Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Kluzniak, and I'm with SBCTA's program management team. And I'll be presenting a high-level overview of the project and orient you to how it fits into the existing and planned regional transit network. So the Tunnel to Ontario Airport project expands on SBCTA's vision for a multimodal transit hub at Cucamonga Station. In addition to the existing Metrolink San Bernardino line, which you can see is the green line on your screen, this transit hub will include expanded regional bus service via the planned West Valley Connector project. You can see the purple line there, as well as privately funded high-speed rail service connecting San Bernardino County and the high desert to Las Vegas. And that would be developed and operated by Brightline West. You can see the pink line there. Our proposed project would provide a direct connection to Ontario Airport from Cucamonga Station via a dedicated bi-directional tunnel, and that's the orange line you see there. Next slide, please. So zooming into a bit more detail, this map shows an overview of the proposed project footprint. The project includes 3 surface stations, one at Cucamonga Metrolink and 2 at Ontario International Airport, one at Terminal 2 and one at Terminal 4. So passengers entering from Cucamonga Station on their way to the airport would board an on-demand autonomous electric vehicle that would be sized to accommodate luggage. Upon departure from Cucamonga Station, the vehicle would travel underground in a 4.2 mile long tunnel, bi-directional, that traverses south under Milliken Avenue and then makes a left turn under East Airport Drive as it enters airport property. The airport stations would be located within the existing Terminal 2 and Terminal 4 parking lots, which would allow just a short walk across the street to the terminals. So in total, we're looking at a door-to-door travel time of less than about 10 minutes or so. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it off to David DeRosa, who's going to go into a bit more detail about the environmental process.
All right, thank you, Brandon. Hi, everyone. Like Brendan said, I'm David DeRosa. I'm the environmental lead with SBCTA on this project. I'll run through several slides about where we are on the environmental process and the project, and then also be moderating some of the questions later this evening. So first, what you see on the slide here is some details around our purpose and need for this project. I won't read them all verbatim, but I will summarize them for you a little bit. Mainly, the purpose is expanding access options to the airport with a convenient and direct connection. So this is, as mentioned before by Brennan, between the airport and the Metrolink station to the north side of our project. And this is going to connect both the rail network for air passengers and airport employees. Another purpose of this project is to encourage mode shift. So going to transit from single occupancy vehicles that currently drive around the existing road network and travel to and from the airport. Another purpose is to support near and long-term projected passenger and job growth at the airport. That coincides with one of the needs that I'll get to in a second. But lastly, one of the last purpose here stated is to support some emerging technology, specifically the automated electric vehicles that were mentioned that would be operated throughout this tunnel. Switching over to the needs, as mentioned, we've got expected job growth and passengers at the airport. So this project would help serve that rising annual passengers, as well as those working at the airport that serve those passengers. The Ontario staffing at the terminals is expected to increase. That's what I was referring to about the increase of jobs at the airport. Also, another need, there's no direct last mile connections between the Metrolink station or the airport. And lastly, public transit, as it is today, is a bit limited directly to the airport. So with those, that summarizes our purpose and need, and we can move on to the next slide, please, where I'll talk a little bit about the funding and the total estimated program funds needed for this are $492 million. And you can see there slices of how this would be achieved with funds that are committed both locally and federally, as well as funds that we are seeking from state and federal resources. We can go to the next slide. And this summarizes our schedule. So you can see where we are now, and you can see the environmental clearance phase. We're beginning this journey, if you will, with tonight's meeting, requesting your comments on this project. But to be clear, as Tim mentioned earlier, there will be a draft environmental impact report down the road, still within this environmental clearance phase, where there will be more details around the analysis that document conducts, essentially, and you'll have an opportunity again in the future to comment on that. Just to reiterate again, what we really would like tonight is your feedback and guidance on what environmental topics you think should be considered within the environmental impact report. So just want to make that very clear. And then you can see the remaining phases here on the schedule going out to operations, which are expected to begin in the fall of 2027. And we can go to the next slide, where I'll cover some of the project benefits. So reducing congestion is one of our project benefits that we aim to achieve with this project, and also specifically for disadvantaged communities. And there would be an opportunity to provide an improved air quality benefit from this project as well. In general, we would increase mobility and connectivity for transit riders to access this service, as I mentioned before, with that direct connection from the train station to the airport. And this would also accommodate future employment and population growth. And lastly, this will expand the options to connect to the airport with that direct, convenient connection for both air passengers and employees at the airport. We can go to the next slide. And This slide is backing up a little bit higher level just to give you a sense of the purpose of the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. So for those of you that may not be terribly familiar with this, this regulation within California, it has several major objectives. And the first one is to inform governmental decision makers like SBCTA and the public like yourselves tonight about potential impacts on proposed projects. Up next is identifying ways that those impacts, if they are identified, if there would be impacts, how they could be avoided, minimized, and or mitigated. And then the environmental document will address those potential impacts. And those can be done through the use of alternatives, avoidance, minimization, and or again, mitigation measures to help reduce any potential impacts. And then there's also the disclosure reasons for the agency, or I should say the agency's decision. And then lastly, to promote and encourage public participation, again, similar to what we're doing here tonight and requesting your feedback on this project. With that, we can go to the next slide, which will be the last slide of sort of the technical details and summary around the environmental process. And we think this is an important slide because this can give you some context as to the type of feedback and guidance or comments that we are interested in hearing from you tonight or anytime during the scoping period. So for example, the list, I'm not going to read the bullet point list here of these items, but these are the very typical common environmental categories and topics that are analyzed in a CEQA document. So all of the topics that you see listed on the screen here are ones that we expect to study. We'll conduct our analysis, release that in the draft environmental impact report, like we mentioned earlier. And then there will be another public opportunity to review that environmental document and provide detailed questions or comments on the analysis in that document. But again, tonight, these are areas of which you could think about the project. You've seen where it is proposed and bring to our attention any specific thoughts or comments that you have regarding what should be studied in the environmental document. So hopefully that makes the intent of tonight's meeting very clear. And with that, I will turn it over to Madison as we segue to the Q&A.
Thanks, David. We have just a couple of reminders before we open up the Q&A. We'll be using the raise hand feature within the Zoom platform to answer your question after this evening's presentation. For those of you using Zoom on your computer, laptop, smartphone, or tablet, please follow the instructions on the screen. And if you are calling from a telephone or a landline tonight, please use *9 to raise your hand and press *6 to mute and unmute yourself to provide your question or comment. We encourage your participation and questions at today's meeting, but the discussions that take place during the presentation will not be part of the official record. As mentioned before, there are several ways to submit comments by August 5th, 2022. You can submit a comment this evening with our court reporter in the breakout room, which is open right now. If you'd like to submit a formal comment with the court reporter, please rejoin the presentation once you are done, as staff can only allow one participant at a time in the court reporter breakout room. Additional ways to submit comments can be found on this slide, as well as at go.sbcta.com/tunnel. Please remember the deadline to submit comments for the Tunnel to Ontario International Airport project is August 5th, 2022. But as David and Tim both mentioned, this will not be your only opportunity to submit feedback during the environmental process. Our team will be back once the draft environmental impact report is circulated to share the outcome and to solicit additional feedback and comments from the public. The entire team here looks forward to continuing this discussion surrounding the project, and we will now be taking your questions from the participants.
Okay, thanks so much, Madison. It looks like Bernice TS has a question. I am going to send her an email to unmute herself. And Bernice, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, my question is so after all of this is built, is the traffic that, like most people are going to be using and paying for these services, is there like a timeline in regards to when that money is going to be returned? Like, the money that was gotten from the state and federal funds?
The money that we were talking about that's needed for funding the project.
Yeah, it's just the question that I have because obviously there's going to be some kind of, like, you guys have already figured out the kind of traffic that there's going to be and the percentage of people that will be using this route. So is there like a timeline that you could estimate when the returns of this investment would show?
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe I'll turn it over to Victor for some of the funding. But just to elaborate a little bit on that, a lot of this is going to be pursued through grant funding. So the environmental analysis being a necessary step toward qualifying a project to be able to apply for grants. That's about the extent that the environmental process is sort of interested or concerned with the funding mechanism, if you will. But I don't know if Victor, you have additions that you want to speak to on that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. A couple of things on the, so some of these projects, that are regional in nature, they do, tend to require different funding sources ranging from the local, state, and federal funding sources. As it was mentioned earlier, a lot of those funding sources that we as an agency go after are grant funding. They don't require to be paid back to the state or the federal government based on after the project is completed. And so the numbers that was presented earlier today, the anticipated project cost, of course, that's the cost based on the information that we know today. As we're here today, we're going to go through the amount of process, final design, and into construction to polish up that information, as well as to gather additional ridership and design information. But specific calculations of return on investment is something that we haven't done.
Victor, maybe you can also elaborate a little bit of how transit fare box work, right? It's a portion of this operating cost associated with it. It's not necessary to repay capital improvements.
Correct. So then part of the, once the project is completed, the project itself, right, it would, just like any other transit service, does require a payment and a fare. There's a fare tied to that as well. Obviously, as we will embark later on in some of those studies on what that should be. And generally speaking, once the service is up and running, the transit service in general tend to have like around a 50% fare box recovery rate, which then even part of that funding is used to put back into the actual operations of the service itself.
Bernice, I think this is Tim Watkins. I think it's a great question because we do have projects on our roadway side where we receive federal loans that we use for the express lanes, for example. When that service comes online, it will be used, money generated from that service will be used to repay those loans and any local tax resources that are used for that. So it's a legitimate question. I think it's important to understand that not just our transit has a fare box recovery that's less than 100%, but all transit across the nation is in that circumstance where nothing is self-supporting in that way. So, but the revenue generated is used to offset the cost of the operating associated with the service. It's a great question, though.
Thanks so much, Tim and Victor and David. So I'm going to ask Mr. Khan, Azar Khan, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My two quick questions is more so the long term, one of which I do understand that Ontario was thinking about building a third terminal. The first question is there any thought for either expanding or potentially expanding into a third terminal, or at least an expansion for an opportunity for a new expansion of the terminal? And then also, would there be any connection to the Metrolink that's the Riverside connection Metrolink, either Ontario Metrolink or the other one that's Metrolink Riverside line? Those are my two questions.
All right, thank you, Azar. The first one around the a potential third terminal at Ontario, I think, again, Victor or Brandon, if you could help respond to that as far as what any plans might be around that. And then connection to future Metrolink stations was the second question, I believe. What I can refer to now for this process that we're under is the project footprint that was shown earlier on the slide deck tonight. And then the project that translates essentially to what's called the project description of the environmental document. It has its limits at the Rancho Cucamonga Station and the Ontario Airport, the two terminals that are there now. So at the moment, that's the definition of the project that we are going to conduct the environmental analysis for. But then, yeah, if others would want to add about the extension or addition of a possible Ontario terminal or other Metrolink connections.
Yeah, I think with respect to the airport, we've been working closely with the airport authority over the last year, making sure that our development plans are well coordinated with their future development. And as you mentioned, the third terminal. I think at this time, the project as it stands today is not contemplating, at least in the near term, access to the third terminal. But through our design process, one of our objectives is to define future expansion potential. So I, can't really say more than that at this time, but I think it's a good thought.
Great, thank you so much, David and Brandon. Okay, I'm going to call on, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Adriana Rizzo. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You can ask your question.
Great, thanks. My first question is about regarding the autonomous vehicles. I'm wondering how the 8-year completion time estimate came around. Given the project is relying on a autonomous vehicle technology that does not really exist right now. We don't have fully autonomous vehicles, just sort of guided driver assistance things. And I'm wondering if you have identified potential vendors for the vehicle system for this project.
Okay, thanks for that. Brandon, I wonder if you're best to jump into this one.
Yeah, as far as the vendor selection, we're kicking off a procurement process right now that would solicit design builder teams that would come along with proposed technologies to deliver the service that we've talked about today. So that's not something necessarily the SBCTA is picking ourselves, but we're going to look to the market and what they're proposing to offer. To your first point about the vehicle technology and the maturity, definitely this is an emerging market, an emerging technology. There's new companies popping up every day. There are actually a couple systems, even an airport system that's in operation today at Heathrow Airport. This would be the first system of this kind in the United States, but there is precedent for this sort of system in other parts of the world. And there are multiple technology suppliers out there that are in production that are offering the sorts of vehicles that we're looking at for this project.
Great, thank you so much, Brandon. Okay, Mr. Henry Fung, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You can ask your question.
Okay, hi. My name is Henry Fung. Question. So you have a fact sheet on your website that was published earlier this month. So thank you for that. So we talk about committed funding is about 200 million and there's about 290 million or so they're seeking. What kind of funds are you seeking for this? And what are the kind of types of funds that are committed on this project? And then the other question is related to project operations and maintenance. The fact sheet said it was operated and maintained by Omnitrans, but then, the question I just had is that, there could be another operator. Who is actually going to operate this? Is it going to be Omnitrans? Is it going to be like a sub to Omnitrans? And of course, people in San Bernardino County know that Omnitrans doesn't operate on 6 major holidays. So would that also happen with this project, or what is the proposed operations? Is that going to operate every day the airport is open, or is it not going to operate when Omnitrans doesn't operate, which is the 6 holidays? Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. Victor, do you want to provide an answer regarding the funding types and perhaps some of the different grants that we would be going after?
Yes, I can provide. So some of the, if we go to our website, we do have some other information on some of the funding that was approved by a board that makes up some of that committed fund. It's a combination of local funding sources that as an agency we're able to allocate to the project. And then what that allows us to do is that once we have a certain amount of funding committed to the project, we're able to progress the overall project delivery, which is obviously what we're doing today, is going through the environmental process, and through this process continue to seek the remaining funding that is required to complete the project. And so what we would do on some of these projects is we go after, there's various programs on the state and federal level that depending on the type of project that you have, that you can start seeking. To give you an example, there's a couple of funding sources that come to the state that's tied to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And again, depending on the type of project, as an agency, we submit competitive grants, write a proposal tied to the project, obviously with intent of getting awarded funding. But it is a process that as an agency we do and manage in order to potentially cover up a lot of funds from various state funding sources to make this project whole.
Great, thank you so much, Victor.
Thank you, Sarah and Victor. We just want to make a quick reminder that we do have a court reporter available in the court reporter breakout room for this meeting. If you would like to submit a comment to be considered in the draft environmental impact report, you would just go to the bottom of your screen and select breakout room and then court reporter. We're allowing one person in at a time, and we have a staff member in there to help guide you. Again, you can go ahead and access that breakout room at any time. Thank you.
Madison, Tim Watkins, really quick. Yes. I don't want to discount Mr. Fung's additional questions, right? He had questions about operational durations during holidays and things of that nature. So I want to make sure that if there's information to share, there may not be at this point, but at least recognizing that we want to capture those thoughts as part of the evaluation process going forward, that we actually analyze and study that operational risk or potential, right? So I don't want to discount Mr. Fung's additional thoughts. So David, was there more for us to respond to that?
Yeah, what I can say at this point, what you'll eventually see in the environmental document is a description of the operations. So, you mentioned the holidays, hours of operations, those types of operational details will be described in the environmental document. So I don't know if anyone on the team right now has got specifics on that. It might be a little bit too early, but that is a piece of information that will be used in the operational analysis, because it relates to any potential environmental impacts of operating, not just constructing, but of operating the project.
David, I could speak to that. So as part of the procurement process I mentioned earlier, The expectation would be that the design build contractor that we're bringing on board would operate the system for a short-term period. We're looking at a minimum of a year after completion of constructions, and then it would be handed over to Omnitrans for the long-term operations.
Great. Thank you so much, David and Brandon. Thank you, Tim, for bringing us back to the rest of Mr. Fung's question. Mr. Weisbart, I know that you were trying to raise your hand and I think it finally worked out. I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate that you're holding this meeting. First of all, as I understand it, the boring company is no longer associated with this project. We happen to be involved at their very beginning of their efforts. They had a test tunnel that they built in Hawthorne. There were a number of issues that were raised as they began using that, including a lot of vibration and a lot of issues that did not satisfy the people riding in those test rides. I don't know if there's been an analysis of what was going on that went badly for them. The bigger question for me is the degree to which there's been an analysis along the route of what is underground that the tunnel may obstruct that tunnel, and whether that has been something that's been analyzed and completed. Everything from sewer lines to, well, I don't need to fill you guys in, you know what that is.
Yeah, great. Those are great questions. Thank you for that. That's a perfect example of what we're interested in with your comment about the boring company, any kind of operational vibration issues. So it's good to hear that example. The other part of your comment about underground utilities, absolutely. The answer is no, that analysis has not been completed yet, but that is 100% on our list, if you will. That is going to be a part of the draft EIR that gets released down the road. So that takes a look at existing utilities and anything like that that's underground, and acknowledges where they are and any kind of impacts that may arise from the alignment of this project.
And David, while it is identified already as one of our studies, if you will, I think it's still valuable, Mr. Weisbart, if you either email or provide that comment so that it's captured within this process to ensure that it is ultimately addressed. And then you'll see it once we get to the draft document stage. And then if it doesn't address your concerns within that process, you have another opportunity to comment on what we actually evaluated. So I encourage you again to provide your comments into the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David and Tim. Okay, Mr. Salvador Torres, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
All righty, thank you. I have a question for consideration about the construction. Is there consideration about concerns for earthquake in the process of constructing the tunnel portion of this route? As in, is there the consideration for construction to withhold and ultimately not have the tunnel collapse during any major or minor earthquake?
So a geotechnical analysis is one of the CEQA topics, geology and soils, and that's the section of the EIR that's going to discuss that, disclose any faults that may be nearby the project site, and discuss its risk to the project, to exactly the things that you just said. So that's where that's the section that you could look for that information when we do reach the release of the draft EIR.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Avant Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. I have two actually, and hopefully I'll make them quick. I understand this meeting may be about the CEQA process, but I was firstly wondering if there was a NEPA commitment and what the timeline for that was. And secondly, was wondering if you could give some details on the partnering agencies that the Transit Authority is partnering with for this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, there is a NEPA document that is planned as well. It's on I would say a similar timeline to the CEQA process, but that is taking place. Specifically, you saw on the slides earlier, that funding slide again, that there's federal dollars being requested, and that's typically the sort of threshold for entering into a NEPA analysis document. So that is planned as well. Partnering agencies, I wonder if Victor or Brandon, if you want to jump in on that and talk about either some of the past outreach or planned outreach and as it relates to our any kind of nearby or partnering agencies.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a bit of that. As far as, outreach and coordination, from the program management side, we've been working closely with Ontario Airport Authority, the cities of Rancho Cucamonga and Ontario, obviously Omnitrans as the eventual operator. Those are the core partners on the project. And then there's, other project stakeholders that are impacted by or potentially impacted by our project running in the vicinity of their facilities and structures that we've been coordinating with.
The other one I would add, Brandon, right, is to touch on the NEPA side, of course, we've been working with the Federal Transit Administration as it relates to our NEPA process as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Marvin Norman, I think you had two hands up. I think you're dialing in and you're on a computer, but I'm gonna ask you to unmute and hopefully that works for you to ask your question.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, yeah, sorry, my phone, I was on my phone, but then it crashed, so now I'm back on the computer. Yes, yeah, my name is Marvin Norman, San Bernardino resident. I've read all the studies that SBCTA and previously when they were Sandbag did on the various ways of getting to Ontario Airport several times. So hold on. So I have it. One hand, it's exciting to see that something is finally moving forward. On the other hand, it's disappointing to see that this is what's moving forward. Many of those studies, pretty much all those studies, identified intermediate stations between or for the projects that they were at the time studying, identify intermediate stations between where the transit would leave the Metrolink line and get to the airport. And this one has none, even though it goes right past some apartments, past the mall. It skips that office to park on Inland Empire Boulevard, the arena, etc. So it's obviously it's meeting the goal of going between the train station and the airport, and only that. And in the process, it looks like it's leaving a lot of potential uses in the wayside. I'd also echo the comments. I believe it was Mr. Fung or someone who recently mentioned about talked about the operational time of Omnitrans. Recently, I flew out of Ontario, and my flight was at 5 a.m, so we got there at like 3:34 a.m. And so it would be, we have to make Omnitrans doesn't really run very much service that early, and quite honestly, neither does Metrolink. So, but at the very minimum, it would be, for it to be useful, it has to run that early and earlier. And it would also be good to get more information, as was mentioned, on that third terminal. I don't know if you could expand the scope of the study. If you're studying, you might as well study it now. and just when they build it at the same time. And finally, I'd also point out that in some of those studies, they also did mention rerouting the Riverside line to serve the station as well. So it would be good to study a station that would study a connection with that rerouted Riverside line, so that people who would be taking that could get there. And finally, of course, would be how ADA compliant the vehicles are. I know the current iterations of what this has been in Las Vegas and stuff all use stock Teslas, which aren't necessarily ADA compliant. And while no operator has been chosen, it would be good to make sure that they can. So it would be useful to make sure we get that information before we try to environmentally clear a tunnel that only works for cars that can't be ADA compliant. And then, we're back at square one with the EIR in hand for a kind of a useless project. So anyway, I think that's my comments for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. Those are good comments. I think we've got those. I would again encourage you to either submit, like you can see on the screen, through those methods, and or go talk to the court reporter in the breakout room if you're able, so that we can get those documented, because of quite a few things there. But one of the things that I would speak to is the ADA vehicle compliance, and the environmental documents intention would be describing a system that would be fully ADA compliant, especially around some of the, like we mentioned, the partnering agencies or other grant funds that we'd be getting. So I think in no way would the environmental document itself limit a component like that of the future operator of the service. So just to make sure that we've that's not the intention of the environmental document. I don't know if do others on the team have any other thoughts or clarifications around Marvin's other comments. I think for the most part they were not directly CEQA environmental analysis related, but just in case.
Yeah, I think what you offered is for him to capture that to us. Marvin is a very invested participant in how people move around the county, very engaged, and so I celebrate what he does. And but what he offered were comments, and so as we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, that comments made here or will be heard and responded to as we can, but they're not part of the formal process. And so please, Marvin, if you can, use the email or use some other means to get those included into our process.
Great, thank you, Tim and David. So it looks like Adriana Rizzo has another question. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, great. Thanks for letting me ask a second question here. My question is regards to, I guess, in the study process, is this specifically related to the tunneling project? And I guess in considering alternatives, have you done a feasibility analysis comparing like cost, environmental impacts of a tunnel compared to like a surface transit route? Like I'm echoing the comment somebody else who asked a question around like water, like sewage, electrical lines, that sort of thing. Like, but with those, I think that's very important to be considered, and that's something that can add a lot of costs and delays to tunneling projects. I'm wondering if you've done an analysis comparing that to surface options, basically.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. So there has been a collection of previous studies. I think Marvin alluded to it in his comments over the past decade or so. I think upwards of 5 or 6 studies around the area and we had actually, sorry, no, I was thinking of something else. But yeah, we do have those studies that have been conducted with various modes, connections, routes, and alignments. And so that is the sort of cumulative analysis for this project that allows us to define and describe the tunneling project. So that is the combination of all those previous studies that we're using for arriving at this build alternative.
Great, thank you so much, David. It looks like Bernice has another question. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, thank you again for letting me ask another question as well. I also just wanted to point out that there's a lot of industrial like warehouse. So like there's a lot of people that work in that environment, and so they have daily commute in that area. So that's the environment that goes on there, right? That's the traffic. Have you had any consideration or have a solution in regards to how their daily commute is going to be affected? And have you also maybe thought of turning the tunnel into a bridge somehow? Because that seems like that would be a lot less of like work that would go into it, or have like, you know, other examples of other tunnels that have been made. So to have a good perspective on how long it takes to make a tunnel that withstands earthquakes and doesn't affect people's daily commute.
Thank you, Bernice. Those are good questions. So that's a good question about the surrounding environment for any of the land uses that our project is going through or near. And the transportation and traffic analysis is a fundamental topic within CEQA. So we're going to have a very detailed analysis in there that explains the existing condition along with the projected growth out into the future. So you speak of the surrounding land uses, the growth of those land uses will be taken into account in the traffic analysis. And then there will be a specific clarification, or not clarification, but the traffic analysis will account for during construction and then during operations. So there will be plans and procedures detailed in the environmental document about how the project will handle the local roadway network during construction. So all of that will be described and analyzed as to its potential impacts. The other question around essentially is like I think an alternative question, you know, a project alternative. It could be above grade. Again, that's something that has been studied throughout the various, a handful of studies within the area. And so we will be describing what those studies, the summary of those studies in the environmental document that again allowed us to arrive at the project that we're proposing now.
Thank you so much, David. Brian Yanity, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
Hello, thank you. Oh. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today. I would just like to briefly make a comment that whatever technology is chosen, please don't use rubber tires on a road type of thing, you know, steel wheels on steel rails or maglev, whatever the case may be. But, you know, just the reason why rail is so much more energy efficient mode of travel has to do with, you know, less friction on steel. And plus tire pollution, like particulate matter from tires eroding as they go, it's a real thing, and there's more and more scientific evidence how it's not good for people in an enclosed environment of a tunnel. I would imagine it'd be worse, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Jacob Segura, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Mr. Segura? I don't think we can hear you. Mr. Salvador Torres, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity for a second question. For this upcoming study, would it also include, I think it's multiple questions, would it include the future, I guess, charging stations, since these vehicles will be 100% electrical? Will there be in the study a location for wherever these vehicles charge or wherever they get maintenance? Where would the location be for the maintenance of these vehicles? Would it be on the airport or would it be on a different property? And my other question is again about the tunnel. Say for example, if an autonomous vehicle for whatever reason gets off course or gets into an accident or just the battery dies in the middle of the tunnel, is there in the study, would it include alternates such as emergency exits or just plan Bs when the vehicles fail during the route?
Yeah, thank you. Those are good questions. So yes, a maintenance facility and any associated or needed charging infrastructure for the vehicles is a part of the project. So that will be included as part of the project description and analyzed accordingly. And then also yes to emergency access. There are pretty strict guidelines, regulations, and requirements around tunnels and making sure that there is appropriate emergency access accordingly. So that will also be considered and analyzed in the environmental document.
Thank you, David. Avant Ramsey.
Sorry for the additional question. Thanks for taking it. Wondering just for clarity, if the 2 stations at the airport will be paid for by the transit authority completely? And can you confirm that they're on airport property? Thank you.
The question about payment, I don't know if Victor or Brandon, if there is that sort of level of detail about project components. So you can maybe jump in after. But the second question about airport property, yes, those stations at the airport are on airport property.
And then as far as the capital and the initial capital investment for this project, yes, the construction of the stations, or improvements at both ends of the tunnel will be part of the project and are generally paid as part of the initial capital improvement project. Later on we will typically enter into project MOUs that we define that's with the airport to get that specific agreements in place. But that's something that we do anticipate to be paid as part of the project.
Thank you, Victor and David, for those for those answers. I just wanted to jump in one more time. This is Madison Viola. We wanted to remind you that there is still a court reporter in the breakout room. If you have a comment, these are some great questions. But again, if you have a comment that you would like included in the draft environmental report, please go ahead and visit our court reporter or make your comment on one of the selections on your screen right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madison. And Bud Weisbart.
Yeah, thank you again for this meeting. Really appreciate it. I think that as was implicit in some of the other questions or comments, is were there other? There's a tremendous wow factor to have this as a tunnel project. I know that, and that's exciting. I'm wondering if there were other alternative ways to accomplish the same goals that were studied, and if those might have been limited by the fact that funding for this high profile of a project might have obscured the ability to look at other alternatives?
Thanks, Bud, for the question. You know, again, I can say that there is this collection of various modes and routes that has been studied in the region and the area for a while now. And so the environmental document, both the CEQA and NEPA document, will address, to the adequacy of what's required for both agencies here that would approve these documents, the needed either alternatives for the project so that it can be, it can meet the standards of the environmental analysis. And so again, we'll be sort of collecting those previous studies that have been done to date and include those in the analysis.
Thanks, David. Did you have a comment, Tim? Okay, so Madison, if you could get us to the next slide, please. Looks like we have responded to everyone who has raised their hand and had a question or a comment. We had several of our guests provide comment to our court reporter. As long as we don't have any more questions, the meeting will come to a close. Again, you can email us or call us at that info@go-sbcta.com or give us a call at 877-55-SBCTA. And we would be happy to follow up with you and respond to your questions or comments. But we do appreciate everyone who participated tonight. It looks like there are a couple more hands raised.
Yeah, let's entertain those questions.
Okay, absolutely. Bernice, I'm going to unmute you.
I just realized that it actually seems like a really good idea because there's a lot of research you can do to the fact if this is the best way of traveling. It could also be then used as research for there to be improvements in the other lanes, that the Metrolink or the train station offers, right? To make improvements and redevelop those areas. So I figured that with all of this new lane that's being created, or the tunnel, there's actually a lot that could be learned from it. I think that's good, actually. Right? That's it.
Okay. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to thank Bernice for the comment.
Perfect. Thank you. And Marvin Norman, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, yes, thank you again. I know several people have talked about alternatives, and I brought up that this has been studied several times. So in terms of alternatives for the study, what level of study of alternatives would there be done? Because I'm sure we all know that there are lots of alternatives that have been studied previously, and so but obviously those weren't environmental documents; those were just planning studies. And also, secondly, I know it's not you folks here since you aren't the board setting the policies, but a reminder that this is a good reason to advance the projects on the Metrolink corridor to upgrade it to 15-minute service so that people have something to reach once they get off this loop and don't have to wait 2 hours to get a train.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. Yeah, that's a valid point about the studies in the past, but I can say that the environmental documents, both CEQA and NEPA, are going to clearly spell out the process by which we arrived at the proposed project and the build the build option that is going to be in the environmental document.
Thank you, David. And looks like one more question from Cesar Reyes. Cesar, I sent you a note to unmute. Okay. Oh, there you go. Nope. Okay. Mr. Reyes, we will follow up with you after the meeting. Make sure that we get your comments. So with that, it looks like now we have no more comments or questions or hands raised. Again, we are available all of the time. Give us, send us an email, give us a call, and we will respond to you. Again, we thank you so much for participating in tonight's meeting. It was a robust discussion about this important potential project from the agency. And we look forward to keeping open lines of communication with all of you throughout the environmental process itself.
Sarah, just one last reminder about I think it's August 5th. Is that the end of this period, David, for receiving comments related to the scoping of this effort, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, August 5th. So this has just been outstanding. I appreciate everybody's participation a lot.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully you have a great evening.